I'd like to hear about it. After talking about diabetes, let's just talk a little bit more about what glucose is used for. It's an immediate source of energy, and if it's not being used for energy, it's stored in glycogen storage in the liver and the muscles. It's the preferred energy source for the brain, the central nervous system, and red blood cells. When it releases glycogen and the glycogen is catabolized or hydrolyzed into glucose, it provides energy for these functions. Muscle glycogen, much more selfish, only wants to release its glucose for muscle functioning. And any glucose or carbohydrate taken in excess of what the body needs, once those glycogen stores are filled, those carbons will be used to make triglyceride and stored in the adipose tissue. So glycogen is the storage form of glucose in mammals, and we are mammals. It's made from dietary carbohydrate. As I said, dietary carbohydrate gets broken down into glucose and then stored as glycogen, or else used by the brain and central nervous system and other cells. Excess carbohydrate gets converted to triglyceride. I want to talk to you about the protein sparing effect of carbohydrate. This is why dietary carbohydrates are so important. When you are consuming carbohydrate, then your body is able to use those glucose molecules for all of these functions. But when you're not getting adequate dietary carbohydrate, your body still wants to use glucose for energy. And so it will start breaking down those amino acids in your muscle in order to use those carbons to form glucose. When you consume adequate dietary carbohydrate, you are sparing the body from using protein for energy. I want you to understand the term carbohydrate is protein sparing. I want you to know the protein sparing effect of carbohydrates. I feel like I'm saying this. So we store carbohydrate as glycogen in the liver to regulate blood sugars and in the muscle for exercise. You don't need to know these specific numbers. So let's see. We're going to review lactose intolerance. Previous videos talked about hypoglycemia. We're finished talking about diabetes, so let's look a little bit closer at lactose intolerance because it's a carbohydrate disorder. So lactose intolerance, if you recall, is a deficiency of the lactase enzyme. The absence of this enzyme, the body is unable to break down the disaccharide lactose into glucose and galactose. This is strongly tied to evolution. There have been several gene mutations that have been identified. I like this picture on the left of the amino acid sequences. You certainly don't have to use those, but for some people it's a genetic condition. Symptoms include gas, bloating, cramps, and diarrhea. Because the body can't absorb disaccharides, so it moves into the large intestine. Let's look at this picture. We have a dairy product being eaten, and we have lactose in the gastrointestinal tract. In the absence of lactase, lactose is unable to be broken down. It moves from the small intestine across the pyloric sphincter into the large intestine. And it's in the large intestine that the bacteria catabolize or break down lactose into glucose and galactose. Water is pulled into the large intestine to help break down these products. It's this water being moved into the large intestine that leads to cramps and bloating and diarrhea. Not pleasant. You can consume products like Lactaid. If you do find a yogurt that has live cultures in it, you want to make sure it is good for folks with lactose intolerance. We see a lot of advertising that yogurts have lots of bacteria in them, but you want to make sure that it's the kind that breaks down lactose into glucose and galactose. Otherwise, you're going to suffer the effects of lactose intolerance. Aged cheeses are low in lactose. I know cheddar's one of them, but I don't remember others right now. So you can consume these products, or you can take Lactaid pills if they work for you. Lactaid pills contain the lactase enzyme. Some people need to take several Lactaid pills, and for some it unfortunately doesn't work for. And so they must avoid dairy products. Fortunately, there are a lot of non-dairy products out there that will provide you with the nutrients and hopefully the flavor that you get from dairy products. You need to remember the difference between a lactose intolerance and a milk allergy. The lactose intolerance is the inability to digest milk sugar, lactose, not an allergic reaction to milk protein or casein. If you recall, the allergy elicits an immune response. It involves antibodies and antigens. Antigens, or in this case, allergens, because we're talking about an allergic response. The body recognizes this milk protein as foreign, and it causes IgE antibodies to have an allergic reaction in the body. This allergic response can cause hives, mucus, respiratory distress, gastrointestinal distress. It's not pleasant. This slide reviews what we talked about when we looked at food allergies and intolerances, how the allergen enters the body, the primary response, which doesn't result in an allergic response, but primes the mast cells for a secondary response when histamine is released. If we summarize carbohydrate disorders and diseases, glucose required for the brain, central nervous system, red blood cells. Carbohydrate is the preferred energy source for the body. All carbohydrates get converted to glucose for energy. Excess carbohydrates will first fill up the glycogen stores, and once those glycogen stores are filled, those carbons are stored in adipose tissue as triglyceride. Liver glycogen maintains blood sugars for the body. Muscle glycogen works for activities, especially high-intensity exercise. Insulin and glucagon help regulate blood sugars. Insulin lowers blood sugars. Glucagon raises blood sugars. And these hormones are not working correctly when someone has a diabetic condition. Lactose intolerance when you're lacking lactase, and it's not the same as milk allergy. Hypoglycemia means low blood sugar. Hypoglycemia is low blood sugar. It can be reactive, spontaneous, or drug-induced. Hyperglycemia is high blood sugars, and if blood sugars stay high over time, that's a sign of diabetes, which can occur as type 1, type 2, or gestational. Unmanaged or poorly managed diabetes over time can lead to macrovascular and microvascular complications, which you should be familiar with. Individuals with diabetes, they're the ones that need to pay attention to the glycemic index. I don't think non-diabetics should be concerned with glycemic responses. And for diabetics, selecting low glycemic index foods can help slow the rate at which blood sugars rise. All right, see you later.